Now read Matthew 24:20 with me. And pray that your flight may not be in winter or on the Sabbath. That's a very short verse, but it has two very powerful messages. Pray that your flight may not be in the winter or in the Sabbath. Pray. That means our prayers will not change what is going to happen, but it can control when it happens. Do you see that? The sovereign will of God is going to happen. But God says if you pray about it, you can change how it's going to happen for your benefit. Whew! That's enough to preach another 40 minutes, but I don't have the time for it. Look at that phrase, on the Sabbath. Jesus is saying here, Israel is going to be back in charge of the nation. The Jewish people are going to come home. Otherwise, the Sabbath rules would not control Israel. When the British were there were no Sabbath rules. But as soon as the Jewish people became in charge of Israel again, the Sabbath rules came into effect again. So what's the difference? If you go to Israel and it's on the Sabbath and you're in a 7-story building that's called your hotel, no one is operating the elevator because that's considered work. It's on automatic pilot, you might say. You get on and you wait for the doors to close. And then a minute later, you go down to the 6th floor. And a minute later, you go down to the 5th floor. And 7 minutes later, you're down in the lobby. You can go down the stairs. Well, some of you could go down the stairs faster than you could go down the elevator. If you have 30 seconds to get to a shelter, you're in trouble. Pray that your flight is not on the Sabbath day. Jesus knew and therefore confirmed in that verse that Israel would be back home and the Jewish people would be in charge.
Jesus was looking into the future. As you go to Matthew 24, he was looking 40 years into the future to the destruction of the city of Jerusalem and the sanctuary there. Do you remember the other night, last Saturday night, we were studying together and we studied about that sanctuary and the prophecy in Daniel, that long time prophecy about the judgment hour, the sanctuary being cleansed? Do you remember Daniel 9 verse 26, where it told and prophesied that the city would be destroyed and the sanctuary would be destroyed? Remember reading that? Well, this is what Jesus is talking about here now in Matthew 24. He refers back to it. Matthew 24 verse 15, let's start there. Matthew 24, 15. He said, when you therefore shall see the abomination of desolation, spoken of by Daniel the prophet, stand in the holy place, whoso reads, let him understand. So he refers back to that prophecy in Daniel when Jerusalem would be destroyed and the temple would be destroyed. Verse 16, then let them which be in Judea flee into the mountains. Let him which is on the housetop not come down to take anything out of his house. Verse 18, neither let him which is in the field return back to take his clothes. Verse 19, and woe unto them that with child and them that give suck in those days. Now verse 20, but pray ye that your flight be not in the winter, neither on what day? The Sabbath day. Now get the picture. Jesus is with his disciples. He's looking 40 years into the future to when Jerusalem and the sanctuary is going to be destroyed and made desolate. And he tells his church, listen guys, I want you to pray. I want you to pray two things when this happens. Number one, pray that you don't have to flee in the winter. Why, Lord? Because if you fled in the winter, it would be hard. There would not be food to eat. You know, even to this day in the Middle East, if you are hungry, you can go through your neighbor's field and pick some fruit or some vegetables or whatever you need to sustain life for that day. That's still a custom practice. And Jesus realized if they fled in the winter, there'd be no food. But then he said, pray that you don't flee on the Sabbath day. Why, Lord? Because that's my holy day. I don't want you desecrating my holy day. Now, folks, think about this. Here is Jesus, 40 years looking into the future and still asking his church to honor the Sabbath day. Can you say amen? Now think about it. If the Sabbath day was going to be changed to another day like Sunday, then Jesus would have been crazy to have made such a prophecy as this. If there was to be a New Testament Sabbath that was going to take the place of the seventh-day Sabbath, then this prophecy wouldn't make a bit of sense. But folks, the fact that Jesus himself looked 40 years into the future of the Christian church and still asked his disciples to keep the day holy tells us it's important to Jesus, clear to the end of time. And not only that, God answered their prayer. You read the story in history, they fled on a Wednesday, on the month of October at the peak of harvest. And you know there was not a single Christian that died in the siege of Jerusalem or the destruction of the temple. Thousands of Jews fell, but not a single Christian died because they prayed and God answered their prayer. And so, folks, of all the 10 commandments, believe it or not, this is the only one that Jesus specifically talked to his church to be sure they were honoring years after he left this earth. Of course, he wants us to honor all of them, but this is the only one that he specifically asked his church to make sure that they didn't desecrate 40 years in the future. If it's important to Jesus that long, it's important clear to the end of time.